Hello and welcome to Igniting Inclusion, Sparking Action. My name is Margaret Ressi-Milkent, and I am the co-chair of the WBC Insurance Affinity Group. We are so delighted to welcome Kelly McDonald, keynote speaker, award-winning, best-selling author, and friend. Friend of insurance, friend of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and a woman who ignites inclusion everywhere she goes. So, Kelly, thank you for being with us. Thank you for igniting our conversation. And over to you, my friend.
Thank you. I was going to say also friend to you, Margaret. And so friend to the industry, friend to everyone. Let me get my screen here up and we will go to full screen here. There we go. Okay. So what I wanted to talk about today was the nature of belonging, and then as that relates to specifically working with people and leading people not like you. We are all working with people who are not like us, however you want to make that definition. You know, a morning person is different than a night owl, an introvert is different than an extrovert, etc. And before we begin though, let me start with let's talking about the business case for diversity. So I like to talk about diversity from this standpoint, the center lane of business, because whatever other things that people are thinking about, you know, it's been tagged with the word woke at times, or about social injustice or racial injustice. And these are all very important things, but we're here today to talk about business. And I want to share with you the business case for diversity. The first thing I want to share is that the census has actually been tracking diversity for several decades with what they call the diversity index. This is a quite simple thing to understand. Basically, the index means what is the likelihood that any two people chosen at random anywhere in the country will be of different races or ethnicities. Okay, so that's all it means. Now, the census did define it as race and ethnicity. That was their definition of diversity. So it didn't take into consideration sexual identification, didn't take into consideration gender, age, and other things that we know are diversity. But just starting with this, that's what it is. So as you can see from this chart, in 1980, if I grabbed any two people at random anywhere in the United States, I had a 34% chance that those two people would be of different races or ethnicities. Or in other words, I had a 66% chance that they were going to be of the same race, probably white, because that was the composition of the United States at that time. But look how fast it's changed. In 5 decades, we went from a 34% probability to a 61% probability with the 2020 census. And the census doesn't just do a census every decade and then kick back and relax for 9.5 years. They're constantly updating their forecasts and their reports. And as of July of 2022, they put the Census Diversity Index at 71. So what that means now is if I grab any two people at random anywhere in the country, I have a 71% chance that people will be of different races or ethnicities and a 29% chance that they'll be of the same race. Now, as you can imagine, it's not the same everywhere. We have diversity within diversity. So if we break it down into some things that you might just find interesting, the top 5 most and least diverse states. So every state has a diversity index, and I'll show that to you momentarily. But the top 5 most diverse states are California, Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, and Hawaii. And the way that you interpret this stat is I'll take Nevada. If I grab any two people at random anywhere in the state of Nevada, I have an 81% chance that those two people are going to be of different races or ethnicity. Now, the top 5 least diverse states, also no surprises: Montana, New Hampshire, Vermont, West Virginia, and Maine. So pretty much all of New England and a Western mountain state in West Virginia. So as you can see here, there's a huge disparity between the top 5 most diverse and the top 5 least diverse states. And so, it isn't a one size fits all across the US. And in fact, here's a map of the United States with the diversity index for every state. So, for example, just thinking about the least diverse states, if I had gone just a couple of more, clicks down, it would have included North Dakota, Iowa, Kentucky. So You're going to get a copy of this presentation and you've got the recording here, but you can see here where all your friends and family and loved ones are and the diversity index for each state. Now, I like to talk about diversity in a way that a lot of other people don't. A lot of people sort of default to thinking that diversity is what I call the big five: race, ethnicity, age or generational differences, sexual identification, and gender. Those are very important, and that's where diversity conversations started a couple of decades ago. But I believe that diversity is any way that you can be different from me. So to illustrate that, I want to share with you some ways to think about diversity that you might not have thought about. What about people who like to work alone? Some people do their very best work alone, and they're like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, and I'll let you know if I have any questions. Others are more collaborative, and they like to work together in teams and groups. They like to brainstorm and ideate. Neither one of these is right or wrong. They're just different ways of working. What about neurodiversity? If you haven't heard about that, you're going to hear a lot about it in the coming years. It's the diversity within the brain. And so it encompasses disorders such as ADHD, Tourette's syndrome, autism, and bipolar, etc., but also thinking styles, like literally different ways that people think and how they learn. So that's something you're going to be hearing more and more about. This particular graphic I like because it's so clear that this man is disabled and that he uses a wheelchair for his mobility. But my husband has severe hearing loss, very, very severe. I mean, he's, one click down from deaf. And he wears hearing devices, and those hearing devices get him to about 95% of normal hearing. But my point on this is you can't look at my husband and see that he has a disability, and he does, a pretty severe one. Not all disabilities are visible, and that's something to keep in mind. And what about different styles of dress, and self-expression? People with colored hair, people who wear a lot of jewelry and have piercings and tats and their style of dress. That's a way that we can be different from one another. Different religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Sikh, Buddhism, and dozens more. Family structure: gay couples with children, gay couples without children, straight couples with children, straight couples without children, single parents, multiracial families, blended families, and a whopping 12% of the population is considered grandfamilies. Grandfamilies are those families where the grandparents are raising the grandchildren, either participating on a financial level or actually raising the children. Perhaps the parents aren't in the picture, but 12% is a pretty big stat. And here's some other ways that you might not have thought about diversity. Introverts and extroverts, right? I'm sure on your teams, you have people who are very introverted and very extrovert. Again, nothing's right or wrong, they're just different. Creative versus analytic thinking. An engineer thinks differently than a graphic designer does. An insurance sales professional thinks very differently than an actuary. Morning people and night owls. Generational differences and perceptions of good service. My 86-year-old mother, her idea of a great customer experience with you would be to come to your office and sit down and discuss insurance all day, like all afternoon. And maybe you would bring her a coffee and some cookies at 3 o'clock. Most of the rest of us would find that to be a tremendous imposition. And we'd be like, why is this taking all afternoon? This is not a good customer experience. So neither is right or wrong. It's just what the person wants. Rural and metro. Someone who lives in a loft in downtown Chicago is very different than someone who lives on a ranch in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Communication styles: face to face or email and texting. Some people really want to see somebody else's face, even if it's just on a Zoom call. Other people are like, just text me. And the big one, folks, the one that's dividing all of us right now, the one that's so polarizing, and it's about values, and it's about like just trying to understand how the other side thinks. And that is, of course, Apple people and Google people. So a little levity there. Now, I want to talk about 3 modes of belonging. There's 3 modes. I mean, you don't just like jump into belonging and go, okay, I belong. Belonging has to take a shape. It has to take a form. And those forms are engagement first, then alignment, and then imagination. All right. So I'm going to share with you 4 ways to foster belonging along those lines. The first one is build trust. Now, every management book in the world talks about the importance of trust. But interestingly, social psychologists have identified that there's not just one kind of trust, there are two. The first is called common trust. Common trust does not have to be earned. We grant it to people automatically, even people we don't know, maybe even especially people we don't know. It's the kind of trust that when I'm driving down the road, I have to trust that the person on the other side of that road is not going to cross the median and hit me head on. I don't know that person. I don't know if they're a distracted driver. I don't know. I have no choice when I'm driving but to just have faith that that person's going to stay on their side of the road and not hit me. That's called common trust. I'm flying home today from a business meeting, and I have to trust that my pilot is well trained and well rested. When you go out to eat, you have to trust that the chef didn't poison you. We have to put literally our lives in the hands of people that we don't know every day, and it's called common trust. But the kind of trust that great managers and teams have is vulnerability trust. Vulnerability trust breaks down walls, but it has to be cultivated. You can't just say, trust me. It has to be earned and cultivated, and it has to be reciprocated. So that's why I like this graphic, because most people focus on this graphic with the woman with the apple on the head and the archer, and they think, holy smokes, she must really trust that that archer's aim is true. But he has to trust that she's not going to flinch. Because if he takes that perfect, precise, true aim, and at the last second she flinches, all bets are off. This only works if they actually trust each other. So, how do you build vulnerability trust? Talk straight, be honest, even when it's hard. Actually, especially when it's hard. It's really easy to give good news, right? You walk into your teams, with your team or wherever, you go, great news, everybody. The real test of your leadership and your management skills are how you deliver the difficult news. It's never easy, but the test of you giving the respect to your team is how you deliver that. So don't dodge around it. Don't start saying, well, if it were up to me, all that. The other person is literally, when you're sitting down with them to tell them difficult news and you're not getting to it, here's what they're thinking. Just tell me. We have to honor that because we're adults. We can handle the truth, even difficult truth. We might not like it, but we can handle it. What we can't handle is the runaround. So talk straight, be honest, even when it's hard, and use simple language. I find it interesting that some of the largest companies in the world, when they have a real problem to solve, they don't go to business buzzword bingo. They go to the simplest, clearest language. Let me give you an example. Toyota's one of my clients. Toyota will tell you that they don't sell cars and trucks. They make cars and trucks. Dealers sell cars and trucks. So they're very dependent on their dealer body to be successful. Well, they were having a truck problem, and when truck sales are off, everything is off because trucks are high gross profit vehicles. You cannot make up with Corollas and Camrys what you're missing on trucks. So they were having a truck problem. They decided to have a meeting and call the top 30 truck dealers in the country together. These guys are the big truck dealers. I was at this meeting, and here's how exactly it went down. No embellishment on my part, exactly. The senior VP of sales walked into the room and he thanked the dealers for coming. And then he simply said, we can't hit our sales numbers unless we hit our truck numbers. You don't have to be a sales professional, you don't have to be an automotive professional to understand exactly what the problem is. It's that clear. So the dealers kind of nodded and took that in. And then he followed it up with more simple language and said, so what do you need from us to help you sell more trucks? Well, the dealers put their heads together for about 20 minutes and they came up with a list that's not rocket science. It's pretty much the stuff you would expect. And all of this went down in 40 minutes with no PowerPoint, no graphs, no charts. 2 comments. We can't hit our sales numbers unless we hit our truck numbers. What do you need from us to help you sell more trucks? That's simple language. Now, why is it in the trust category? Because when you're speaking that simply and clearly, no one is going to walk out of that meeting going, I wonder what he was trying to say. What do you think she meant by that? There's nothing but clarity there, and you can trust that. Collaborate. When we're working with people, whether they're exactly like us or totally different than us, a sense of belonging is created when we collaborate. But we have to be open to ideas. Not every idea that someone is going to serve up when you're collaborating is actually going to be either a viable idea or even a good idea based on what's going on, in your company. And it's understanding that it's not about proclaiming that idea to be good or bad. When someone is sharing an idea, I think our natural inclination is to go, "That's a great idea, Margaret," or, "Margaret, that's just not going to work, and here's why." We have to lean into what the thinking is behind it with something like, "Tell me more about that." Or, "Help me understand how you came up with this." Because sometimes the idea that someone is presenting is flawed, over budget, we don't have the time to do it, whatever might be not making it work. Maybe the idea is flawed, but the thinking behind it is not. So if I can get to that thinking behind it, "Margaret, tell me more about that. Tell me how you came up with this." I'm going to try to get to that thinking behind the idea. Now, tone matters because there's a huge difference between, "Margaret, help me understand how you came up with that. Tell me more about that." And, "Margaret, how did you come up with that?" Okay, so we don't want to ever have that tone. Tone matters. When you're really collaborating, remember, it's not about proclaiming an idea to be right or wrong or good or bad. We want to get to the thinking behind it. That's where the genius lies, and it'll spark other ideas. Also, ask for help with your ideas. We all, come up with ideas. We all have strategies. We all have trains of thought that we want to share with somebody else. And here's the way to ask for help and actually get something helpful. Let me start with the don't. The don't is, "Hey, I have an idea. Can you help me with it?" When you say that, the other person is primed to find the flaw. It's like an auditor. An auditor is never going to audit your taxes and go, "Clean as a whistle, you got this." They're going to find one little thing. They don't think they've done their job unless they do. So it's the same thing when you ask somebody, "Hey, what do you think of this?" They think that their idea is to help you polish it up and find the flaw. That's not always the case. So here's a better way. Draw that person into collaboration with this. "Hey, Margaret, I have an idea and I would like your feedback on this to make it stronger." Do you see what I did there? I boxed her in, putting her in a lane where she's going to feed me things that are going to make this idea better, not pick them apart. This is what you're after. Agree to disagree. I want to talk about this because when we're working with people who are not like us, whatever that is, you're not always going to see eye to eye. And that's part of work, and that's part of life, and that's okay. So the problem with that, though, is when people say, "Well, let's just agree to disagree, shall we?" And then the other person says yes, that conversation is over. Right? "Margaret, let's just agree to disagree, shall we?" And Margaret says, "Right, yes, Kelly." We're done. It's a dead end. It's a conversation ender. I don't think that's good for business. I think we should always be able to talk about the things that we need to talk about, especially the stuff that we don't see eye to eye on. There's more there. There's something I'm not understanding about how Margaret sees it if we don't see eye to eye on this. So here's a better way. I see it differently. I see it differently is completely effective and disarming because it's not antagonistic. I'm not saying, "I can't believe that you can't see that I'm right." And it's not judgmental or superior. I'm not going like, "I have this idea. I don't know why you're not on board with this." And I'm not being combative. I'm not trying to pick a fight. And I'm not even trying to get Margaret over to my point of view. It's just a simple declarative statement. I see it differently. And here's what's going to happen. If Margaret says to me, "Kelly, I see it differently," I'm going to say, and you're going to say something along the lines of, "Well, tell me how you see it." And then we're furthering the conversation. We don't want a conversation ender. We want a conversation extender. "I see it differently" is going to get to the thinking behind whatever her position is, her concerns, etc. That's where the gold is. I want to know what's behind all of that. Agree to disagree, we're done. I see it differently, we continue. Now, having said that, if Margaret and I are, we're seeing it differently and she's sharing and I'm sharing, we might ultimately not agree, but we're going to know a whole lot more about why that is rather than just let's agree to disagree. Look at this graphic. Is it 606 or is it 909? It's both. Depends on how you see it. Keep this in mind. It is possible for two people to look at the exact same thing and see it differently. What we want to know as good communicators is how the other person sees it and draw them out. Also, 4 magic words that are going to change your life. And those 4 words are, I need your help. Stop saying, can you help me? Can you help me is a yes or a no question, and you can get a no, right? So if I say, to Margaret, can you help me? She might say something like, Kelly, I would love to, I love you like a sister, but I got to get these numbers to Dana and I got to get them to her by 3:00. And you know how she gets when she doesn't get the numbers on time, like, she can have a completely legitimate reason and she can actually want to help me, but she can't, and so it's kind of a dead end. But here's what happens if I say, Margaret, I need your help. She will respond, and so will you, and so does everyone, with something along the lines of, tell me what you need. What's going on? How can I help? No one is ever going to say, if you say, I need your help, no one's ever going to go, no. There's a natural curiosity. We actually lean into that and we're like, what's going on? How can I help? And people are hardwired to help. That's how we have survived as Homo sapiens for millennia, is because we have different skills and we help each other. So people want to help. We're naturally wired to help. But don't frame it as a yes or a no, because you can get a no and it can be a completely legitimate no based on what that person is also juggling that day. But if you say, I need your help, you're going to get help. And even, okay, let's go with this example of me and Margaret. Even if I said to Margaret, I need your help, and she said, what do you need? And I explain what I need. And then let's just say that Margaret is actually not the person who has that information, but she knows who is. It's Dana. She might say, you know what, Kelly, I don't have that information. I'm not doing that part anymore, but Dana is. Let me actually send her a text real quick and I can get her to help. All of a sudden, Margaret becomes a stakeholder in this, even though she actually can't help. She'll connect me to somebody and help get me on my way. Again, this is anthropological. We are wired to help. So stop saying, can you help me? And say instead, I need your help. I want to leave you with my favorite quote. And that is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go farther, go together.